Chapter 1. The Bet. The marketplace of Xylorian Prime sprawled beneath an immense glass dome that refracted the light of twin suns into cascades of color. The air buzzed with alien chatter, haggling voices, and the soft hum of levitating carts laden with strange goods. Traders from every corner of the galaxy filled the stalls, offering wares that ranged from shimmering crystals to living, singing instruments. It was chaos, but it was beautiful chaos, and Lieutenant Ethan Carter, a human explorer known for his recklessness and charm, fit right in. Ethan had spent years navigating the fringes of known space, mapping uncharted territories and surviving encounters with hostile species. But today, he wasn't chasing adventure, he was chasing her. Syrah, the Xylorian botanist with a sharp tongue and sharper wit, stood behind a stall overflowing with glowing flora. Her emerald green skin shimmered like polished jade, her long, silver hair cascaded like molten moonlight, and her amber eyes glowed with an inner light that seemed to pierce through Ethan's very soul. She was a vision of elegance and intelligence, and Ethan had been utterly captivated from the moment they met. "You again, human?" Syrah asked, her voice smooth and melodious as she inspected a flowering vine that writhed slightly in her hands. "Do you have nothing better to do than linger around my stall?" "Guilty as charged," Ethan replied, flashing her his signature grin. "But can you blame me? Your plants aren't the only beautiful things around here." Syrah rolled her eyes, though a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Flattery will get you nowhere. Besides, I doubt you even understand half of what I'm selling." Ethan leaned on the counter, pretending to examine a glowing flower whose petals shimmered like starlight. "Sure I do. That's a Luminara bloom, native to Galmaris 9. Its nectar is a key ingredient in your planet's healing tonics." Syrah's eyebrow arched, her amusement turning to mild surprise. "Not bad, human. Perhaps you're not as dense as you look." "High praise coming from you," Ethan quipped, earning a genuine laugh from Syrah. Despite her teasing, Ethan knew she enjoyed their banter. Over the past few weeks, he'd made a point of visiting her stall every time he docked at Xylorian Prime. At first, it had been an excuse to learn more about the exotic plants she sold, but it didn't take long for his curiosity to shift to her. Syrah was unlike anyone he'd ever met, confident, clever, and utterly unbothered by his charms. "What's this one?" Ethan asked, pointing to a small, nondescript plant with dull, grayish leaves. "That's a mimic's folly," Syrah replied, her tone professional. "Completely useless, but it's good at disguising itself as more valuable plants to deter herbivores." "Sounds like it'd fit right in with my old squad," Ethan joked, earning another eye roll. As they talked, the crowd around them ebbed and flowed, aliens of all shapes and sizes stopping to inspect Syrah's wares. Ethan barely noticed them. His focus was entirely on her, the way her hands moved deftly as she arranged her plants, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about her work. "Tell me, Syrah," Ethan said, leaning closer, "what's the rarest plant you've ever seen?" Her expression turned thoughtful as she placed a cluster of glowing bulbs on a display rack. "That would be the tailless orchid. It's said to grow only in the heart of Veridara, a planet shrouded in perpetual storms. The orchid blooms once every 50 years, and even then, only under very specific conditions." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a challenge." Syrah chuckled, shaking her head. "It's more than that, human. It's impossible. No one has ever successfully retrieved one and lived to tell the tale." "Impossible, huh?" Ethan grinned, his mind already racing. "What would you do if I brought you one?" Syrah smirked, folding her arms across her chest. "If you somehow manage to find a tailless orchid, I might actually take you seriously." "Is that a promise?" Ethan asked, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "It's a joke, human," she replied, though there was a glimmer of intrigue in her gaze. "But sure, if you find the orchid, I'll owe you something." Ethan straightened, his grin widening. "Deal." Before Syrah could respond, an alien customer approached her stall, asking about a particularly vibrant vine. Syrah turned her attention to the transaction, leaving Ethan standing there, his mind buzzing with excitement. He didn't know much about Veridara or the tailless orchid, but he knew one thing. He wasn't one to back down from a challenge, especially not one from Syrah. Back on his ship, the Stellar Whisper, Ethan dove into the archives, searching for any information he could find about Veridara and its elusive orchid. The ship's AI, a cheerful entity named Nova, projected a holographic map of the galaxy, highlighting the coordinates of Veridara. "Warning," Nova chirped. "Veridara is classified as a high-risk planet. Severe atmospheric storms and unpredictable terrain make it inhospitable for most life forms." "That's never stopped me before," Ethan muttered, studying the map. "Shall I prepare the ship for departure?" Nova asked. Ethan hesitated. This wasn't just a risky mission, it was borderline suicidal. But the thought of returning to Syrah with the orchid, of seeing the look on her face, was too tempting to resist. "Do it," he said, his grin returning. "Let's find that flower." As the Stellar Whisper prepared to jump to Veridara, Ethan leaned back in his seat, the weight of the challenge settling over him. He had no idea what awaited him on the storm-racked planet, but one thing was certain. This was going to be his most dangerous and exciting mission yet. Chapter 2. Into the Storm. The Stellar Whisper emerged from hyperspace into the chaotic orbit of Veridara, the heart of storms. Ethan stood at the ship's control console, staring out at the view beyond the reinforced glass of the cockpit. The planet looked like a swirling vortex of doom, its surface hidden beneath an endless cacophony of raging storms. Lightning flashed in vibrant arcs across its turbulent atmosphere, painting the blackness of space with hues of electric blue and violet. "Well, this looks cozy," Ethan muttered, gripping the console as the ship rocked from the planet's powerful gravitational pull. "Warning," Nova chimed, her holographic avatar appearing beside him. The AI's translucent figure flickered slightly as she adjusted to the ship's jostling. "Atmospheric conditions are highly unstable. Entry not recommended without reinforced shields and specialized navigation protocols." Ethan smirked, running a hand through his tousled hair. "Good thing we've got both, right?" Nova raised an eyebrow, an expression she had adopted after spending years observing human behavior. "Reinforced shields and protocols will reduce risk, not eliminate it. Odds of survival remain at 37%. "I've survived worse odds," Ethan replied, strapping himself into the pilot's seat. "Let's do this." The Stellar Whisper groaned as it descended into Veridara's atmosphere, its shields flaring against the planet's electromagnetic onslaught. The ship's sensors screamed warnings as violent winds buffeted the hull, forcing Ethan to wrestle with the controls to maintain stability. "Nova, give me a topographical map," he said, his voice tense as he focused on navigating through the storm. "Generating map." "Now," Nova replied, projecting a hologram of Veridara's surface. The image was chaotic mountain ranges carved by relentless winds, deep chasms filled with glowing energy, and vast plains ravaged by perpetual lightning strikes. At the map center was a cluster of glowing green markers. "Those are the regions where the tailless orchid might grow," Nova explained. "They align with the orchid's need for extreme electromagnetic exposure and volatile soil composition." "Sounds like paradise," Ethan muttered, steering the ship toward the nearest marker. "How close can we get without crashing?" "Current conditions will force a landing approximately 15 kilometers from the target zone," Nova said. "The rest will require traversal on foot." Ethan groaned but nodded. "All right. Prep the gear and make sure the ship stays in one piece while I'm gone." The Stellar Whisper touched down on a jagged plateau, the ship's landing struts barely holding against the ferocious winds. Ethan donned his reinforced exploration suit, its exoskeletal frame designed to withstand hostile environments. The helmet's visor displayed real-time data from the ship, including atmospheric readings and terrain analysis. "Be careful, Ethan," Nova's voice crackled through his comms. "If you die, I'll have to fly back to Xylorian Prime and explain to that Xylorian botanist why you were so reckless." Ethan chuckled. "Don't worry, Nova. I'll bring back the orchid and maybe some souvenirs." The moment he stepped out of the ship, the storm hit him like a tidal wave. Winds howled around him, carrying shards of debris that clattered harmlessly against his suit's reinforced plating. Lightning crackled across the dark sky, illuminating the barren, alien landscape in harsh flashes. Ethan activated his suit's magnetic stabilizers, planting his boots firmly against the rocky ground as he began his trek toward the target zone. The terrain was treacherous. Sharp rocks jutted out at odd angles, and deep fissures glowed with an ominous green light that hinted at the planet's volatile core. Hours passed as Ethan navigated the storm-ravaged plains, his determination driving him forward despite the mounting challenges. The closer he got to the target zone, the more unstable the environment became. Lightning struck dangerously close, forcing him to dive for cover behind jagged boulders. "Nova," he said, his voice strained as he caught his breath. "How much farther?" "You're approximately 2 kilometers from the target zone," Nova replied. "But I'm detecting increased seismic activity in the area. Be cautious." "Caution's my middle name," Ethan muttered, though his heart pounded as the ground trembled beneath his feet. As he crested a ridge, the target zone came into view. It was a massive crater, its center glowing with an eerie, pulsating light. The tailless orchid stood at its heart, its petals shimmering like liquid starlight. The flower was breathtaking. Its delicate petals emitted a soft glow that seemed to dance in harmony with the storm around it. Ethan's awe was short-lived as the ground beneath him shook violently. He barely had time to react before a massive creature emerged from the crater's edge. The beast was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. A towering, serpentine form covered in metallic scales that crackled with electricity. Its glowing eyes locked onto him, and it let out a deafening roar that sent shivers down his spine. "Nova," Ethan said, his voice tight. "What the hell is that?" "Analyzing. It appears to be a storm warden," Nova replied. "A guardian species adapted to Veridara's extreme conditions. It likely views you as a threat to the orchid." "Great," Ethan muttered, drawing his plasma pistol. "Any advice?" "Run," Nova suggested, her tone uncharacteristically unsure. The storm warden lunged, its massive body coiling around the crater as it struck at Ethan with lightning-fast precision. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws, and fired his pistol. The plasma bolt struck its scales but barely left a mark. "Figures," Ethan muttered, scrambling to his feet. The warden roared again, its body crackling with electricity as it prepared another attack. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. The creature was too powerful to fight head-on, but he couldn't leave without the orchid knot after coming this far. As the warden lunged again, Ethan noticed a cluster of glowing rocks near the crater's edge. An idea sparked in his mind. "Nova," he said, sprinting toward the rocks. "Can the suit stabilizers create a localized EMP pulse?" "Technically, yes," Nova replied, "but it will drain your power reserves significantly." "Do it," Ethan said, skidding to a stop near the rocks. The storm warden charged, its glowing eyes locked onto him. At the last moment, Ethan activated the EMP. A wave of energy rippled out from his suit, disrupting the warden's electrical field and causing it to recoil in confusion. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan dashed into the crater, his hands trembling as he carefully extracted the tailless orchid from its glowing perch. The flower's petals shimmered as if responding to his touch, their glow intensifying. "Got it!" he shouted, tucking the orchid into a protective case on his belt. The storm warden recovered quickly, letting out an enraged roar as it charged toward him. Ethan sprinted back toward the ridge, his heart pounding as the creature closed the distance. "Nova, prep the ship for takeoff," he shouted into his comms. "On it," Nova replied. Ethan reached the ridge just as the storm warden struck, its massive tail slamming into the ground and sending him flying. He landed hard, his suit systems blaring warnings as he rolled to his feet and kept running. The Stellar Whisper came into view, its engines roaring to life as Ethan sprinted toward the ramp. The storm warden was hot on his heels, its jaws snapping just inches away. With one final burst of effort, Ethan dove onto the ramp, slamming the controls to close it as the warden's claws scraped against the hull. "Punch it, Nova!" he shouted, collapsing onto the floor. The ship lifted off, its thrusters propelling it out of the atmosphere as the storm warden let out a frustrated roar. As the Stellar Whisper broke through Veridara's atmosphere and into the calm void of space, Ethan lay on the floor, clutching the protective case containing the orchid. He was battered, bruised, and utterly exhausted, but a triumphant grin spread across his face. "Nova," he said, his voice hoarse, "plot a course back to Xylorian Prime. I've got a bet to win." Chapter 3. Her face when he returned. The familiar sight of Xylorian Prime's bustling marketplace came into view as the Stellar Whisper descended onto the docking platform. Ethan leaned back in the pilot's seat, his battered body still aching from the ordeal on Veridara. The protective case containing the tailless orchid sat securely in the co-pilot's chair, its faint glow a constant reminder of his near-death adventure. "You did it," Nova said, her holographic avatar appearing beside him. "You found the orchid and survived. Against all odds, I might add." Ethan smirked, his hand brushing over the case. "Told you I had this." Nova raised an eyebrow. "And what if she's not impressed?" Ethan chuckled. "Oh, she'll be impressed. You don't joke about something like this unless you're ready to be surprised." As the ship docked and powered down, Ethan took a moment to gather himself. His exploration suit was scratched and scorched, but he decided against changing. The wear and tear told a story, and he wanted Syra to see exactly what he'd gone through to bring her the orchid. Grabbing the case, Ethan exited the ship and made his way to the marketplace. The familiar cacophony of alien voices and vibrant colors surrounded him, but his focus was singular. He navigated the crowd with purpose, weaving through the stalls until he spotted hers. Syra stood behind her stall, arranging a cluster of glowing vines. She looked as radiant as ever, her silver hair catching the light and her emerald-green skin glowing faintly under the bioluminescent canopy. She didn't notice him at first, her attention focused on her work. Ethan cleared his throat as he approached. "Miss me?" Syra glanced up, her amber eyes widening slightly in surprise before narrowing in skepticism. "You again? I thought you'd given up after I sent you on a fool's errand." Ethan grinned, setting the protective case on her counter. "I wouldn't call it a fool's errand. Go ahead, open it." Syra tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. She hesitated for a moment before unlatching the case. As the lid opened, the tailless orchid's ethereal glow illuminated her face. Its delicate petals shimmered with colors that seemed to shift and dance like a living galaxy. For a moment, Syra was speechless. Her normally sharp, witty demeanor melted into something softer, something closer to awe. Her fingers hovered over the orchid, as if she couldn't believe it was real. You actually found it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at him, her amber eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "How?" Ethan shrugged, though his grin widened. "It wasn't easy. Veridara's storms tried to kill me, and so did a giant, lightning-spewing snake. But I made it. For you." Syra blinked, her gaze shifting between him and the orchid. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." "Probably both," Ethan admitted. "But you said if I found the orchid, you'd take me seriously. So, here I am." Syra's expression softened, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I didn't think you'd actually do it. No one has ever found a tailless orchid and lived to tell the tale." "Well, I'm not just anyone," Ethan said, leaning casually against the counter. "So, what happens now? Do I get to claim my reward?" Syra arched an eyebrow, her playful demeanor returning. "Reward? I don't recall promising you anything." Ethan's jaw dropped in mock indignation. "You said if I brought you the orchid, you'd owe me something." Syra laughed, the sound light and musical. "I suppose I did, didn't I?" She leaned forward, her amber eyes locking onto his. "All right, human, name your price." Ethan hesitated, caught off guard by the intensity of her gaze. He'd thought of a dozen flirty comebacks during his journey back, but now, none of them seemed right. Instead, he spoke honestly. "Dinner," he said. "Just one dinner. No tricks, no jokes. I want to get to know you." Syra blinked, clearly surprised by his sincerity. She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was serious. Finally, she smiled a genuine, warm smile that made Ethan's heart skip a beat. "Very well," she said. "You've earned that much, at least." The two agreed to meet later that evening, and Ethan spent the remainder of the day preparing. He cleaned up, donned a more formal outfit, and made sure to leave the Stellar Whisper in Nova's capable hands. By the time he arrived at the small, atmospheric restaurant Syrah had chosen, his nerves were in overdrive. Syrah was already there, seated at a table near a window overlooking the glowing cityscape. She looked stunning, her silver hair tied back to reveal the sharp angles of her face, and her emerald green skin glowing softly under the restaurant's lights. Ethan felt a pang of nervousness as he approached, but her warm smile put him at ease. "You clean up nicely," Syrah said as he sat down. "Likewise," Ethan replied, grinning, "though I don't think you need much help in that department." Syrah rolled her eyes, though her smile remained. "Flattery again? You're predictable, human." They talked for hours, the initial awkwardness melting away as they shared stories of their adventures. Ethan regaled her with tales of his time exploring uncharted space, while Syrah spoke of her passion for botany and her travels in search of rare plants. He learned that her sharp wit masked a deep compassion for her people and her planet, and she learned that his reckless bravado hid a genuine desire to make a difference. By the time the night ended, Ethan felt closer to Syrah than he'd ever thought possible. As they left the restaurant, she turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "You're not what I expected, Ethan Carter," she said softly. "When I first met you, I thought you were just another arrogant explorer looking for attention. But you've proven me wrong." "I'm glad to hear that," Ethan replied, his voice equally soft. "Does this mean I've earned your respect?" Syrah smiled, her amber eyes glowing in the dim light. "You've earned more than that." Before Ethan could respond, she leaned in and kissed him, a brief, unexpected gesture that left him speechless. When she pulled back, her smile turned playful once more. "Now don't let it go to your head," she said, turning to leave. Ethan watched her go, his heart racing and his grin wider than ever. He'd faced storms, monsters, and near death to win her over, but in that moment, he knew it had all been worth it. Chapter 4. More Than a Bet. The next morning, the marketplace on Xylorian Prime was as lively as ever, but for Ethan, the usual chaos felt a bit different. It wasn't just the colors or the sounds that seemed brighter and clearer, it was the fact that he couldn't stop replaying the kiss from the night before. Syrah's lips had been soft, warm, and unexpectedly tender, a stark contrast to her usual sharp wit. Back aboard the Stellar Whisper, Ethan paced the cockpit, his mind spinning with thoughts of her. Nova's holographic avatar appeared on the console, watching him with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "You're unusually distracted today," she said, folding her translucent arms. Ethan stopped pacing and leaned on the console. "Can you blame me? I brought her the rarest flower in the galaxy, survived storms and a lightning snake, and somehow, she kissed me." Nova raised a holographic eyebrow. "Is this the part where I say, 'I told you so'?" Ethan smirked. "Don't push it, Nova." As much as he wanted to see Syrah again, he wasn't sure how to approach her. Was last night just a one-time gesture of gratitude, or was it something more? He didn't want to ruin whatever delicate connection they'd built. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself wandering back towards Syrah's stall. The marketplace was packed, and he had to dodge a few oblivious shoppers to get there. When her stall finally came into view, his heart skipped a beat. Syrah was there, as radiant as ever, carefully tending to a new batch of plants. But something was different today. Her usual playful smirk was absent, replaced by a faint furrow of concern on her brow. "Hey," Ethan said, stepping up to the stall. Syrah looked up, her amber eyes softening when she saw him. "Ethan, back so soon?" "You know me," he said with a grin. Persistent. That earned him a small smile, but it quickly faded as she returned her focus to the vines in her hands. Ethan frowned, sensing something was off. "Is everything all right?" he asked. Syrah hesitated before sighing. "There's something I didn't tell you about the tailless orchid." Ethan's heart sank. "What do you mean?" She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "The tailless orchid isn't just rare, it's vital to my people. Its petals contain compounds that are essential for a treatment we used to combat a disease that's been plaguing our planet for centuries. The orchid you brought back. It could save lives." Ethan's mind raced as he processed her words. He had risked his life to retrieve the flower, but he'd never imagined it held such importance. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I didn't think you'd actually find it," Saira admitted, her voice tinged with guilt. "And I didn't want to burden you with our problems." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on the counter, his expression firm. "Saira, you could have told me. I would have done it anyway." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of insincerity. When she found none, her shoulders relaxed, and she let out a small breath. "You really are different," she said softly. Over the next few days, Ethan worked closely with Saira to prepare the tailless orchid for use. She explained how the petals needed to be carefully processed to extract the compounds, a process that required precision and patience. Though Ethan had no experience with Xylorian botany, he did his best to help, earning more than a few amused comments from Saira about his clumsiness. As they worked, their bond deepened. Saira opened up about her past, revealing how she had lost her family to the disease that the orchid could help treat. Her passion for botany, she explained, was driven by a desire to prevent others from experiencing the same loss. Ethan listened intently, his admiration for her growing with every word. She wasn't just intelligent and beautiful, she was selfless, determined, and deeply compassionate. "You've been through so much," Ethan said one evening as they sat together in her small laboratory. "We all have," Saira replied, her voice quiet. "But I've learned that strength comes from the people who stand with you." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. The day finally came when the processed compounds were ready for delivery. Saira had arranged for them to be sent to Xylorian's central medical facility, where they would be used to develop the treatment. As she prepared the shipment, Ethan stood by her side, his heart swelling with pride at what they had accomplished together. "You've made a real difference here," Saira said, glancing at him. "So have you," Ethan replied. Saira smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "You're not staying, are you?" Ethan hesitated, the weight of her question pressing on him. He hadn't thought much about what came next, but the idea of leaving her behind felt wrong. "I don't have to go," he said finally. "Not if you want me to stay." Saira's expression softened, and she reached out to take his hand. "Ethan, you're a wanderer. It's who you are. But no matter where you go, you'll always have a place here. With me." Ethan smiled, his grip tightening around her hand. "Then maybe it's time I stopped wandering." In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Saira's partnership blossomed into something neither of them had expected. They continued to work together, blending his daring spirit with her scientific expertise to tackle new challenges. And though their journey had begun with a playful bet, it had become something much more, a story of resilience, connection, and the unexpected beauty of finding exactly what you didn't know you were searching for.